Margaret Ellis vanished without a trace, and Detective Clara Hayes knew from the first clue that this was no ordinary disappearance. In a quiet town where everyone felt safe, someone had planned every move with chilling precision, and they weren't working alone. Briarwood was a town that seemed frozen in time. Tree-lined streets curved gently around old brick buildings, and the sound of children playing in the distance mingled with the occasional bark of a dog. Life moved slowly here, predictably, and everyone knew each other's routines. People left their doors unlocked at night, and strangers were noticed immediately. Crime was nearly non-existent, and residents took pride in their safety. That sense of calm made the events that followed all the more shocking. It began with a simple absence. Margaret Ellis, the owner of the town's beloved bakery, did not open her shop one morning. She was a fixture in Briarwood, known for her warm smile and cinnamon rolls that drew customers from neighboring towns. When she failed to appear, her employees assumed she was running late. By late afternoon, concern began to ripple through the community. Calls to her home went unanswered, and neighbors reported her missing. When the police arrived at her residence, the scene was unsettling. Margaret's car sat in the driveway, doors unlocked, as though she had left in a hurry. Inside, it looked as if someone had rifled through her things, but nothing was missing. A coffee cup remained on the kitchen counter, and her purse was still neatly hung on the coat rack. The disorder felt intentional, almost staged, a message rather than a robbery. Investigators noted the lack of struggle and the absence of forced entry. Whoever had taken Margaret had done so with planning, caution, and precision. Nearby, tire tracks led from the driveway into the forest that bordered the town. The path was rough and uneven, suggesting a large vehicle, something heavier than a standard car. The tracks disappeared among the dense trees, leaving little evidence of the vehicle's final destination. It was as if someone had melted into the shadows, taking Margaret with them while leaving only a trace for authorities to follow. Local law enforcement began organizing search parties, combing the forest and riverbanks. Volunteers joined, holding flashlights and calling Margaret's name, but the woods swallowed the sound and no answer came. The town grew tense. Whispered theories spread quickly. Was it a random act of violence, or did someone know Margaret personally? Her life had seemed ordinary, but the careful execution of her disappearance suggested a mind working methodically, someone who could anticipate each reaction of those who would try to find her. For the first time, Briarwood residents realized that their safe little town might not be as impervious to danger as they had believed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the streets, the woods remained silent. The tire tracks, the scattered belongings, and the untouched personal items told a story of meticulous planning. Somewhere, Margaret Ellis was being held, and someone had orchestrated every step of her abduction with chilling precision. The quiet town that had once prided itself on safety now faced the unknown, the feeling of being watched, and the unsettling truth that danger could arrive in ways no one ever imagined. Detective Clara Hayes arrived in Briarwood with a reputation for solving cases that seemed impossible. She had learned early in her career that details often held the key to understanding a crime. As she examined the scene at Margaret Ellis's home, she focused not only on the obvious signs, the tire tracks leading into the forest and the scattered belongings, but also on the smaller, almost imperceptible details. Tiny scratches on the front door, a smudge on the windowsill, and faint impressions in the soil near the driveway suggested someone had been careful but not flawless. The tire tracks fascinated her most. They were deep, wide and irregular, indicating a heavy, modified vehicle rather than a standard car. Clara traced them as far as the forest allowed, noting the way the vehicle had avoided branches and dips in the terrain, almost as if the driver knew the forest intimately. She photographed everything, marking each footprint, each track, each leaf, disturbed in a way that seemed deliberate. She began to suspect that whoever had taken Margaret had prepared for the terrain and possibly had been waiting for the right moment to move her. The first significant lead came from a local motel on the edge of town. Surveillance footage showed a man checking in late one night, carrying a large duffel bag. At first glance, he appeared alone, ordinary, someone blending into the background. But something in his movements caught Clara's attention. He was cautious, constantly looking over his shoulder, and he handled the bag with care, as if its contents were precious or dangerous. The footage did not reveal any overt violence, but the timing and manner of his arrival suggested he was connected to Margaret's disappearance. Weeks passed, with no further trace of her. Search parties combed the forest tirelessly, but the dense undergrowth and uneven terrain made progress difficult. Every lead seemed to vanish into thin air. Then, a local hiker reported something unusual, a narrow, almost hidden trail branching off the main forest path. Curious, Clara examined it and discovered it led to a small cabin, long abandoned by official records, but clearly in use recently. Footprints led up to the door, and inside there were signs someone had been living there. Canned food, a few blankets, and personal hygiene items. The cabin felt lived in, yet it radiated secrecy. The most disturbing discovery was a map of Briarwood spread across a table. Several houses were circled, including Margaret's, along with notes in precise, small handwriting. It became evident that this was not a random crime. It was planned, studied, and executed with care. Whoever had taken Margaret had knowledge of the town, an understanding of its people, and an ability to remain invisible while monitoring their movements. Clara realized that the case was not only about locating Margaret, but about uncovering a methodical mind operating in plain sight, someone who had prepared for every eventuality and left clues only for those clever enough to notice. As she left the cabin that day, Clara felt the weight of the investigation pressing down on her. The forest no longer felt like a natural barrier, but a labyrinth built for concealment. Every trail, every footprint, every overlooked detail might hold the answer, but the deeper she dug, the clearer it became that she was chasing someone who had already thought several steps ahead. In Briarwood, the line between safety and danger had vanished, replaced by a silent, patient presence waiting in the shadows. Clara's investigation began to reveal a pattern, subtle but undeniable. The man captured on the motel footage was not acting impulsively. Every action suggested forethought, preparation, and an awareness that he was being watched. As she dug into his background, records confirmed he had a criminal history, but it was not violent in the way one would expect for someone capable of a careful abduction. He had been involved in organized theft and evasion, someone who understood the law well enough to stay just beyond its reach. That knowledge alone made him dangerous. The first major breakthrough came unexpectedly. A local gas station not far from the motel had security footage from the night the suspect had arrived. Clara and her team reviewed the tape with painstaking attention to detail, slowing frames and enhancing images. At first, it seemed he had indeed been alone. Then, after repeated viewing, the truth became undeniable. Another man, heavily tattooed, appeared briefly in the background, assisting the suspect with the duffel bag. He moved quickly, efficiently, and with the confidence of someone trained. It was over in a moment, but the realization hit hard. The suspect had brought backup. He had not acted alone. The implications were chilling. If one carefully planned criminal could operate undetected in Briarwood, a pair working in tandem represented a far greater threat. The backup's presence suggested a level of organization that extended beyond a single disappearance. Clara began to review other unsolved cases in the surrounding counties, looking for similar patterns, anything that might indicate the pair had operated before. Every detail of their behavior, the precision, the timing, the ability to vanish without a trace, pointed to a calculated system rather than an impulsive crime. The map from the cabin gained new significance. What had seemed like a list of random houses now took on a more strategic meaning. The suspect had clearly studied the town and identified targets in advance. The addition of a backup meant he could manage unforeseen variables, ensuring that no one could intervene successfully. It was not just an abduction. It was a controlled operation, a small-scale criminal network operating under the radar. Clara understood that Briarwood had unknowingly become a testing ground for their methods. The discovery of the backup changed the entire strategy of the investigation. Previous efforts had focused on tracking one man, predicting his movements, and hoping to catch him off guard. Now Clara had to account for two individuals, possibly more, capable of anticipating police tactics and adapting instantly. It was a game of shadows, with each move countered by another, and the stakes were higher than ever. The realization that the suspect had an accomplice who was trained, disciplined, and ready for any contingency injected a new sense of urgency. By the time Clara left the station that evening, the forest surrounding Briarwood no longer felt merely isolated. It felt like a stage set by someone who had rehearsed every step. The town, so peaceful and predictable, had become a chessboard, and the players were invisible until the right moment. The question lingering in Clara's mind was no longer whether Margaret Ellis would be found, but whether the backup had already anticipated the next move, ready to intervene in ways no one could see. Every familiar street, every hidden trail, every empty cabin held the possibility of danger, and the reality of the case was sinking in. The suspect had brought his own backup, and that meant Briarwood was no longer a place where anyone could feel safe. The investigation shifted into a tense, relentless rhythm. Clara and her team set up surveillance near the houses marked on the cabin map, cameras hidden among trees and disguised as ordinary objects. Each night, they monitored every flicker of movement, hoping to catch the suspect or his backup in the act. But the men were always one step ahead, their presence ghost-like, leaving only traces designed to taunt and mislead. A tire track turned the wrong way, a single boot print in damp soil, a torn piece of fabric tied to a tree. Each clue was a puzzle, deliberate yet cryptic. The town's residents grew uneasy. Windows were bolted, streets were empty after dark, and the forest that had once offered quiet solitude now seemed alive with unseen eyes. Clara felt the pressure of expectation from every corner, knowing that each day Margaret remained missing was a day of potential danger. The two men were not reckless. They were patient, calculated, and ready to respond if anyone threatened their plan. It was clear that the backup was not merely an assistant, but a co-conspirator, someone whose presence allowed the primary suspect to act without hesitation, confident that any complication would be managed. Then came the night that changed everything. Clara had been tracking unusual movement along one of the trails leading to the cabin. At first, it seemed insignificant, a shadow flitting between the trees, but as the night deepened, more figures emerged. The suspect had returned to the cabin not alone, but with two additional accomplices. Their coordinated movements revealed a small but organized operation. This was no longer just an abduction. It was a network capable of deploying resources and manpower at a moment's notice. Shots rang out before anyone fully realized the scale of the confrontation. The forest echoed with chaos. Clara watched from a hidden vantage point, heart pounding, as the men moved with precision, covering each other, securing escape routes, and using the terrain to their advantage. The backup, once a mysterious figure in the background, now demonstrated the full extent of their training. Every maneuver was methodical, every action anticipatory. It became clear that the suspect's original plan had been simple, but he had prepared for failure, bringing reinforcements ready to escalate if necessary. In the aftermath, the cabin and surrounding area were a testament to the men's discipline and forethought. The forest was littered with remnants of a violent encounter, scorched patches of earth, broken branches, and signs of a struggle. Yet the perpetrators had vanished before police could intervene. Clara realized that she was dealing with more than criminals. She was facing an operation that treated danger like a puzzle, with contingency plans for every possible outcome. The abduction had never been about force alone. It had been about control, strategy, and the calculated intimidation of an entire town. The scale of the threat became undeniable. The suspect's backup had transformed the situation from a single disappearance into a test of strategy and patience. Every misstep, every guess could trigger violence or a retreat by the perpetrators. Clara knew that finding Margaret and bringing the men to justice required a level of foresight equal to their own, a careful anticipation of every move in this deadly game. Briarwood, once a quiet refuge, had become a stage for calculated danger, and the forest, silent and dark, held secrets that would not reveal themselves easily. Clara knew the final phase of the investigation required a complete shift in approach. Chasing the suspect and his backup had proven futile. Every attempt had been anticipated, every maneuver counted. She began analyzing patterns instead of pursuing individuals, watching for repeated behavior, studying their likely hideouts, and predicting routes they might take. Briarwood's quiet streets, once predictable and comforting, became a complex map of probabilities and possibilities, each house, alley, and trail scrutinized for the smallest irregularity. Days turned into tense nights as the team monitored the suspects' movements from hidden locations, blending into the shadows themselves. Surveillance revealed subtle patterns, one man scouting locations days in advance, the other coordinating with accomplices to create distractions or false trails. It became clear that Margaret had been moved multiple times, carefully relocated to prevent discovery, and that the backup was not only protective but also proactive, setting up contingencies to ensure control over every situation. Clara realized the full extent of the network they had underestimated. This was a group operating with discipline and foresight, capable of outmaneuvering authorities until cornered. The breakthrough came when the team noticed an anomaly, a pattern in how the suspects handled supplies. Repeatedly, small packages were left near inconspicuous locations, suggesting a planned route of communication or staging points. By carefully tracking these movements, Clara identified a warehouse on the outskirts of town that had been previously overlooked. Surveillance confirmed her suspicion. The suspects had consolidated there, likely holding Margaret and planning their next moves. The operation was meticulously organized, and Clara understood that approaching directly would be dangerous. The final confrontation was carefully orchestrated. Authorities surrounded the warehouse, cutting off potential escape routes while maintaining hidden observation. Inside, the main suspect moved with his backup and additional accomplices, each aware of their surroundings, yet Clara anticipated the tension that would arise from their interactions. In a tense standoff, the backup unexpectedly turned on the main suspect. Years of loyalty and trust fractured under the pressure, revealing internal tensions and rivalries. The betrayal disrupted their coordination, creating an opportunity for law enforcement to intervene safely. By the time officers entered the warehouse, the suspects were apprehended, and Margaret was found unharmed, though shaken and disoriented. Clara surveyed the scene, noting how the operation had been meticulously constructed, yet ultimately undone by the unpredictability of human behavior within the ranks. The suspects' network, once thought invincible due to planning and coordination, had crumbled when trust failed. Briarwood slowly returned to its familiar rhythm, the forest silent once more, but the town had been irrevocably changed. Its sense of security, once absolute, had been shattered by a calculated threat operating in plain sight. The case left a lasting impression on everyone involved. It highlighted the danger of underestimating the lengths to which someone could go when supported by capable allies. Clara reflected on how crucial observation, patience, and anticipation had been to bringing the suspects to justice. Briarwood, a town defined by calm and predictability, had been forced to confront the reality that danger could exist quietly, prepared and methodical, waiting for the right moment. The memory of the week spent navigating this carefully constructed threat lingered in every street, every forest trail, and in the minds of those who had witnessed the extraordinary lengths to which the suspects had gone, and the even greater lengths needed to stop them.